Hey, Chuck, maybe suggestion, can you see?
Chuck, you wanna come sit here?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Chuck.
How you doing?
Jesse, can you get, yeah.
How are you doing?
Chuck, you want something to drink?
Oh, no.
Water?
We're just good, yes, thank you.
Chrissy.
Waited for some. Did well, congratulations.
Okay, Jesse and Rebecca, you all ready? I think.
Yep.
All right, we have 5 of the 6 members of the board here. Karen Raymond called and said she couldn't make it after Casey Stinger, so I think we have 4. We just, for the minutes, we've got Neil Abraham, Chuck Morris, Bill Hammond, Paul Flower, and Lisa Speranza, all present. I'd like to start with the approval of the agenda, which each of you have in your packets. Moved and second to approve the agenda. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, it's approved. In your packet, we have the minutes from our September 22nd meeting. It was provided to you all a day or 2 ago. Hopefully you get a chance to read them. Are there any changes or issues with the minutes? Approved minutes.
Second.
Been approved by Bill and moved by Chuck. To approve the minutes, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are approved. All right, the last issue we have for approval is the quarterly report. We sent the quarterly report out a couple of days ago. Bill, I believe you said that you had one issue or a change with it.
No, I sent a small minor typo change that didn't have any impact on the result itself, and I think that's been taken.
That's been taken care of. Okay. So has everybody had a chance to read?
Yes.
Are there any comments before? Could I have a motion to approve the board?
So moved.
Been moved and seconded to approve the board of the report that's attached in our packet. All in favor? Any opposed? That's been approved. This quarterly report will be sent to the mayor, councilman, the governor, and the Louisiana, the New Orleans delegation of the legislature, which updates the progress that we've made with Fair Share. So with that, I'd like to move into presentations. First is the presentation of the Fair Share agreement by the city of New Orleans. This is an update of where we stand. Last time there was some issues. Have y'all resolved those?
Yes, and I'm going to go over all of that as well.
Okay, great, super.
So we'll start on the first slide. We get the financial update. So these are our numbers as of this month. What you'll notice is that for the month of August, you'll see about $1 million over what we're normally receiving. That wasn't a great month for reception. What that was the adjustment from what we mentioned at the last meeting was a distribution error from the Department of Revenue when it came to tax collections. So we calculated what those errors were. I'm going to go over that in the next slide. And then those were redistributed out to those funds in August. That's why you see that significant bump there. So Sewerage and Water Board, New Orleans and Company, and DPW have all received the proper accounting and the proper amounts of money. So everything is up to date and corrected now. We are seeing, a continuation of good collections. We're up to $20 million overall for the year. We expect right now to continue seeing that pretty much at pace. The other thing that you'll notice is that the collections in August look a little skewed for the lost penny. So you'll see that those are 60,000 and 20,000 respectively. That's because part of the accounting issue was an accounting towards the lost penny and an under accounting towards the STR tax collections. So that's accounted for in that August number there.
That's a quick question. Obviously, if we normalized for the glitch that we had, it would appear to me that both the July, August, and September numbers would have been over $2 million.
Yes, and in fact, the July number is really what made it apparent that there was a financial issue there. I think that at our last meeting, that was where we did not have up-to-date financials for that reason. And if we go to the next slide, we'll actually see what the corrections were. So this is since the beginning of the new STR collection form. And what the issue was is basically, if you are a hotel or motel, you collect your sales taxes at a 5% rate. If you are a short-term rental, you collect both that 5% tax and a 6.75. At the end of your month, you fill out a form on the city's website as part of our revenue collection system. And those forms are basically sister and brother. When the new STR form was created, there was a programming error. So that in the event that in the STR form, if some data was missing, it would revert in terms of where money went to the regular hotel motel form. So we were still collecting the correct amount of money. People were remitting that money, just where it ended up in terms of accounting was incorrect. So these are month by month since that form went in 2020, what those errors were. You'll see that there are some months where there are very large discrepancies. That would be if we had, say, a large tax collector who made a mistake in that form. That would account for why we would have to be a large mistake in that particular month. And you'll see that July of 2022 was a good, excellent, very good example of that. That's really what brought it to the forefront. There was a programming error. But again, the actual money that collected was correct, it's just where it ended up being accounted to.
Good question for you.
Yes.
The programming error corrected.
It had been, yes. That was the first component was figuring out what was going wrong. Then revenue fixed that issue and then went back and did the correct accounting and then journaling back to the correct departments. So none of the money that was collected, most of the money ended up being it was all collected basically at it's all distributed as if it were a regular hotel rate, which is distributed primarily between the city, the school board, and the RTA. So all of those accounts were over, we're given the overage. None of those accounts were none of the money was ever spent or budgeted because they didn't actually even know that they had it. It was just a computer error on our end. And so all of those have been taken care of. Moving forward, all the numbers should be correct. And again, we're seeing that, moving towards that $25 million annual goal is pretty much where we're on pace for 2022. And then the next slide, I believe, just kind of goes over some of our outstanding things. The primary one being our finance one, which I just explained. The actual adjustments that were credited back is probably the key piece here. So $657,000 went to Sewers and Water Board in their August distribution, $219,000 to DPW, and $545,000 to New Orleans and Company. And then Sarah Porteous is here as the interim director of DPW to talk a little bit about DPW's expansion here. We have continued the expansion of the maintenance division and internal workforce. On the next slide, we actually have some detail as to where we're filling those positions right now. We are continuing to fill them with those IMF dollars in DPW. Sarah, if there's anything in particular.
Yeah, I mean, that essentially covers it. The majority of the IMF funded positions are in our DPW maintenance department, from laborers to equipment operators. We've got a lot of vacancies, but we are beginning to make some progress. We are trying to do some things differently. We've actually been working with Pastor Morris in developing a relationship with Thrive to try to diversify our labor pipeline. and try to just, attract some more people to the division. It's been a real challenge actually making the hires. We do have a lot of people for the classified positions that are on the register. They often don't show up for interviews, so it's certainly not for lack of trying, but we've had a real challenge. It's what's happening all over the country in terms of filling those positions. But we are very excited to continue to grow that division. Our goal is to have a dedicated maintenance crew for every council district. I know that will make Councilmember Chambers so happy. But that is the ultimate goal that we're continuing to work with.
Sarah, I want to commend you for your intentionality as it relates to looking for and when you fill those positions, but also looking at return to citizens,
Yes,
people in unserved communities. So thank you.
thanks for the opportunity to work together.
Quick question, funds for the IMF, obviously fair share goes into that fund. Where are the other sources of revenue for IMF?
So IMF at this point is entirely those fair share pieces. There were some one-time money that came out at the beginning of the fair share agreement.
Okay.
And as well, some capital specific. But for the most part, what ends up in IMF every month are those SDR lost penny funds.
And excuse me. What we're looking at right now is total IMF fund. So
On the revenue, yes.
75% of this is going to Sewage and Water Board and 25% to DPW.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, if you go back to the slide previous, or I guess it's slide 2. One more. You'll see that it's actually, in terms of the revenue, it's broken out. This is the IMF basically has those 5 components. And we'll see it eventually. The lost penny and then the STR equalization are the 2 major pieces. Those both get split between Sewage and Water Board and the Department of Public Works. And then that last piece is the STR occupancy tax, which goes to New Orleans and Company primarily.
Okay, and what's not, there's 2 things, there's one thing that's not in here. And that is, when you look at what the total fair share was gonna be, it was gonna be the DDD, $2.5 million that the city got them to increase their millage. And I think there's some sort of an agreement with the DDD that those funds would be used for certain
Yeah,
street
this is for green
improvements
infrastructure
and the
elements.
warehouse and CBD. So when we were looking at it, the fair share, we were looking at that $2.5 million as part of it. And we also were projecting, I'm sorry about this, it won't happen with the recording, but we projected, now this is 4 years ago, I realized, but we projected the lost penny would bring in 12 million on an annualized basis. And so if we are right on that point, it looks like we've got, what, 3 months left in the year? Yeah,
Yes.
another quarter. So certainly that's a heavier quarter. It's more occupancy. So maybe it's going to be a little bit more than another 2 million here, but looks like the lost penny is only coming in somewhere around 8.5 to 9 million a year.
Well, it's already brought in 8.5 for the year. So if you notice, there's actually, it's broken up into 2 pieces here in our chart. So you have Sewage and Water Board component, which is 6.3 million, and the DPW component.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
see the
so
other side.
we
Yeah.
break up in those first 2 columns and.
I'm with you. That's Sewage and Water Board part. I missed that. Thank you.
So 12 million is probably in line.
In line. Got it. Yeah, okay.
I have another point I want to make that I think it'd be better made when Gilbert gets to his discussion, but I really want us to talk about the missing $5+ million a year that is going to New Orleans Tourism and Culture Fund rather than to the fair share agreement. And I've got some details in that question, but I just don't, as we talk about these funds, there is another component that is not going into the IMF that was part of the negotiations with our hospitality partners. And we need to find out how that's going to be replaced.
And I believe Gilbert's presentation addresses that. So we can pretty much just go through the last 2 pieces. One was just actually an update on that DDE piece. So we do have that green infrastructure project that is currently in place. Sarah, you could probably talk a little bit more about it. this was the last scheduling update for the permeable paving and
Yeah.
water storage piece.
Yeah, the designer has been selected, and so that contract is in the process of routing. But it's Wingate Engineers. I think they actually did a presentation to one of the DDD board committees, I think earlier this week. So they're still gonna be working on kind of what their outlook will look like, but it's basically a 5-month design contract. So realistically speaking, they probably won't start construction until early next year. Just when you think about how long it's gonna take to procure, to get a contractor on board. Originally, we talked about, I think, 19 blocks. And when that pricing was determined, obviously the market conditions has changed. So, there's probably gonna be some shifts in how many blocks we can actually get done. But it's basically gonna be a pervious pavement with perforated pipe underneath, kind of like what we did on Union Street. That was the first project downtown. We did some green infrastructure elements. So making some progress now, having the designer on board, we're very excited about that.
This has been so long and getting from point A to point B. There was a period of time when the DDD asked for the ability not to put up any money because they didn't have any money. And then they made a commitment to this 2.5 million to go specifically within the DDD area. What are we looking at going out from there, like the next 3 or 4 or 5 years? Do we have any idea whether any of the DDD commitment will start flowing into the infrastructure maintenance fund as it was intended?
So I don't have any update on that right now. It's something that I can get an update from DEP on.
Thanks.
Absolutely. So that's it for that piece, and really just the last piece was just the same update that we have on where we are in capital outlay from the state. And if there are any other questions I can answer, I'd be glad to. I'll try and get you an update on where we stand with DED moving forward on infrastructure.
Thank you.
And if there are no other questions, I believe.
I am one of.
Absolutely.
You just, you'll bear with me. When we were looking at Fair Share in the beginning, it ended up to about 25 million, included that 2.5 million from the DVD. And the agreement was that 25 million would be split 25-75. And then the DDD created, there was a problem with the DDD, I should put it that way. And the agreement was, okay, they would increase their millage and come up with 2.5 million. The city that's going to DPW for the street and other repair. So my point is, that 2.5 million goes over to DPW. Then there's the balance of it. And is that taken into account, or the balance is just split 75-25? Because I thought the agreement way back when was to take the total and do it 25-75.
That's my understanding.
So that's my understanding. I don't know that I have a specific accounting for you right now, but I can work on achieving that.
That was
All
my
right,
understanding.
just a question.
75-25.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay. The next presentation, I believe, is Gilbert's presentation. So, thank you so much for coming to that, Gilbert. I really appreciate it.
For the invitation. I will provide an update, I think, based on some of the information that was originally requested, but as in any presentation, feel free to interrupt with any peppered amount of questions. I'll go into the one-time question that you had with ARPA and contiguously talk about fund balance. I think the infrastructure maintenance fund was the other piece, and then an update on the drainage consolidation working group and the plans. We can go to the first slide. And I will say that I thought that the budget process was the most robust I've ever been a part of. I think that publicly, I think Joe and his team really did a great job on all the council side. I think that we really saw a wonderful working relationship agreement, not always, but mutual respect and understanding was definitely a big takeaway from all of that. And I think that we're really put a stamp on the most important budget from my perspective that the city of New Orleans will see for decades to come. The reason I say that is the amount of one-time funding that was relative to this particular budget as we were catapulting, at least from a couple revenue streams, into what I feel is going to be a stabilization for the city, reoccurring in the next couple of years. The reason that it was such a unique intersection of these particular items is because probably since Katrina, this is the amount of one-time investment that we're able to really capitalize, hone in on, and develop, projectize all these different initiatives, which are absolutely braided throughout the priorities, I believe, of the IMF fund. Now, I'm looking at it more holistically. I understand there's a little bit of a myopic, acute view on exactly what is relative to here. My perspective from a city perspective is that there is some important blending of, when I say catch basin, I know that's absolutely relative to the IMF, but I also see it citywide when I see surface cut repairs, all of the above. So forgive me from speaking from a little bit more of a broad perspective. I'll dive in as acutely as you need, but that's kind of the way I feel as my role, and I think I've presented to the council and the mayor that perspective. So understanding that we had 2 tranches of ARP, and I'm just going to give a little bit of history, and I know you all probably are fastidious in this knowledge. First tranche was used for lost revenue to carry us out through the remainder of the next fiscal years, through 2025, when we actually see our reoccurring matching. Second tranche was really used for a leveraging opportunity and a catapult for some major quality basic services and public safety dollars, IT equipment, kind of back to basics, governmental needed projects that fit within the categorical use of ARP funds. Separate and apart from that, and quite frankly, as a result of several different factors that I won't go into, some of the methodology that got us here, we have a significant fund balance. Now, we haven't closed out our audit probably for another month, but I expect probably in the beginning of the year, anywhere for an additional $200 to $250 million of one-time fund balance that is carryover reverted dollars for a whole different rationale and reasons, mostly vacancy savings that is carried into the new year. And we use those interchangeably in some ways to fund some of these projects. We did not relinquish, not relinquish is probably the wrong word. We did not spend everything. And we were thoughtful and strategic about what we did spend and what we did appropriate. And we feel like there's going to be a new process probably coming around the first quarter to better evaluate at least the remainder of the ARP portion. And when I say ARP portion, right now, I believe the budget accounted for about 125 million of ARP tranche 2, which leaves us a delta of 70+ million for the next round to be discussed, evolved, debated, and the like. There is a timeline for those dollars to be spent. So that's probably the most important piece that we have to keep in our mind, is that those do have an expiration date. So we can't sit, or nor do we want to sit on those for too long, but all certainly could be relevant to the conversation in the IMF board. So that gives a little breakdown on what was received. You can go to the next slide. This is where I had the team kind of pull out what I thought was relevant to the IMF board on our most recent budget adoption. So $45 million went into the most recent budget proposal for the purposes of 10 million to catch basin. This is separate and apart from what we already do. This is on top of it, all the funding. This is not plugging in.
Nothing to do with fair share.
Nothing to do with, this is separate and apart. But when I say that, I think your leading question was the 5 million. I want us to be thoughtful of, we are investing 45 million in one-time money. So I know that there were some holes that you referenced in that 5 million gap, but I also want to make sure we're marrying the additional $45 million investment that is blended to all the vast majority of things that fair share could or would be utilized for. And that is the catch basin cleaning, of course, the sewage and water board substation most recently announced, and then things that are not the most sexy, but I think will make the most important impact for the residents, including surface cuts, potholes, street light repairs, traffic light repairs, sign replacement and sidewalks, all part of that larger infrastructure piece that we're dealing with. The project plan is to, like I said, projectize each one of these, establish a project lead, project manager, project timelines, sponsors, and then contractual obligations. Everything here I am hoping and I'm pushing the departments to externalize, meaning that internal resources are not being designed or thought to be able to address the mass amount of spending for this, because I want to see very quick and fast outcomes on this. And I think contractual services is the way to go on that. So I can pause there if you all have any questions, or I can keep rolling. I know I said a lot. Joe, I don't want to not give you the floor. You're as much in part of this as anybody. But I can keep going if you all would like, or if you'd like me to spend more time.
Quick
on
question
any
for
of
you, as it relates to the stripping the streets and sidewalks. I know you're talking, taking into consideration for infrastructure and all that we do, right?
Of course.
Yep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's always in the suit.
And I say that as a leader of a nonprofit that oversees that really focuses on workforce development and small business development in that green space. Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Our biggest challenge right now is going to be workforce. That's our biggest challenge. Spending this money, and I've said it time and time again, is going to be the most difficult, challenging part, because there's only so many people that do all that stuff, and everybody's trying to get it done with the same people. So that's going to be our greatest challenge.
And a lot of those, if you don't mind jumping in, but a lot of those contractors are obviously working on many of the infrastructure projects we have going on right now across the city. So it's gonna be another challenge.
These funds are being managed, other than the 15 million in the substation, by PPW.
Not necessarily, especially in when, I guess managed is a broad term. Because they are federally regulated funds, I'm running them through basically a federal kind of grant making agency, because we're gonna have significant scrutiny on them, guaranteed audit unequivocally on how we spend ARPA funds. So I wanna make sure that I'm almost running it similar to the way we would a FEMA grant, so that we're making sure that.
So that's
we're-
in your office.
Well, right now, it would probably be within the federal granting agency, which is part of the PDU, essentially. So I have it running through our federal grants portion, which is also part of the Homeland Security group. The federal granting group is kind of a blend of PDU and Homeland Security, just because they have such experience with those federal grants. And understanding that there are very strict criteria from Treasury to spend ARPA, I just want to make sure we're being.
I want to thank the city and city council for making sure that at least that amount of money is going to infrastructure. Yeah, it's so critical that we, first of all, address these issues, but more importantly, that we show that we're willing to make those investments, hopefully to help us with the next round of funding that's available.
Yeah, I just.
All right. Let me just make a little bit off the subject clear. After you spend all of this, after you put a lot of money, fund balance, and you're drawing down for this plus others, what's going to be left in the fund balance? I mean, normally the crossover was around 36 million or something like that.
Yeah, that's a dangerously low number.
Agreed.
Right, dangerously low number that I hope we never go back to. And that was the rainy day fund. Remember, this is a unique, probably preaching to the choir, is that, best practices, if you're in a financial auditing or a financial kind of bonding capacity perspective, is somewhere around the 10 to 15% of your larger general fund. So that would approximate, $75 to $100 million of reserve safety net funding. Why we are arguing and certainly the council is very supportive of this, I'm thankful, is that New Orleans is so unique in the sense that our federal granting process, meaning that if we have a hurricane, we front all the money to pay for that, and sometimes it's years before we get the return, the reimbursement of the federal government. So the cash flow that the city must have in order to operate government is very different than it would be from Phoenix, Arizona. Right, so we are looking toward the goal, and we're there essentially of 20% reserve funding. So that took us from about 36 million of scary money to closer to about 140 million of reserve fund. And I think that is a safe net for us to be in. Now could be negligible at some amount but anything below that 15%, I would caution future anybody from really dipping too much below that, because you really need to be prepared for the unprepared or the unexpected here. And absolutely, we are seeing that although federal investment is significant right now, if you read the tea leaves, it's only going to be less and less from the actual reoccurring grants that we're currently receiving. So that is why I think one of the things that I think was the best outcome of this budget was the significant preparation in that reserve fund balance for future years to come.
Would that also help your bond rating?
Oh, incredible, absolutely.
Next question.
That would, I think rating agencies already, I recall, I believe at the end of this month, just before the new year, and they read and watch all our news, all the credit watchers. We're out of Dallas and some in New York, but they're already praising that as an organization, we are maintaining that structure. Because a lot of cities, and I'm reading about them left and right, have dwindled away a lot of their fund reserves, especially during COVID.
You had mentioned earlier that there would be about $70 million left in the ARPA 2 funds. That $70 million, this is already spent. That's in addition to this 45 million, or is that 45?
I wish
million?
that was spent, that's appropriated.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
appropriated.
that is not part of that 70 million that you still have.
That's additional, that's out there, that's available, and I think we were contemplating that as well as additional fund balance. Because remember, each year we'll roll over fund balance, so I expect fund balance to roll over from this fiscal year to next fiscal year, and that number continues to grow. You do have to walk that line, is that when you have a city of great need, you don't want to sit on too much of a nest egg, right? Because you need that money out there to address needs. So it's that balance that we're trying to address.
So 70 plus roughly 100. If you keep 150 back.
I think that's minimal, I think it'll be higher.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the reserve, which I get because the federal government always pays us back on the back end. And you mentioned FEMA projects, which work the same way. Does ARPA work the same way where we have to front the money and then get reimbursed?
No, they gave it to us. It's a direct allocation. That was a huge benefit for the cities across the country. It's that direct allocation.
Thank you.
Sure.
Keep going.
Paul, do you mind if I may ask a question? This is the first time I see the slide, so I'm happy to see these numbers. But specifically, is there a breakdown of the 20 million, specifically the surface cuts and any of the surface cuts, sewage and water board cuts, or just yours?
So let me take an initial stab at that and try to remain the nascent nature of this appropriation budget just passed like a week and a half ago. So really from a project manager's hat where we have to put on now, Hassan, is that although this represents 45 million, we actually have 200 and some million dollars that the council actually appropriated that is turning into projects. So I think really what the next evaluation stage that I mentioned prior to is each one of these has to have a project owner, right? So I've expected, one of the things that I really want to change in this perspective are two things. One, an accountability structure, but then also a public interface. So say, for example, surface cuts, and I think to your question, how much of the 20 million is going to go towards surface cuts? I don't think that we have directly married that number yet, because I think there needs to be a little bit more strategy in this, because like I said, it will be at our dismay if we have all this money and the public can't see where it's going, how it's going, and how it's being utilized. I'm just trying a little bit different approach. Instead of saying DPW go spend it, it's going to be ran kind of from a centralized sort of perspective. And I've talked with the council about this too. I think we all have a lot at stake now that we've appropriated such a large amount. And the biggest part is the data to demonstrate the future dashboards to ensure that we are able to better account for those potholes, street lights, sign replacement and the like. And I think there's going to be a lot of learning through that process, but at least an organized structure to get there. So I would hope by the early part of January, we will have better organized a project plan and schedule, almost in the vision of a Gantt chart that hopefully will answer that question.
So if DPW is going to be doing the surface cuts,
I do
now
not.
that money goes to surge or water.
It's gonna stay within the city, but it's gonna be a vendor contractor. I wouldn't have staff, internal staff. Not this particular fund. Did you have anything?
Does
The only thing I
that,
was gonna add, and just so you all know, Hassan's, we've been working with Hassan, Sewage and Water Board on this. We do have a contract that's advertised right now that's actually opening on Friday for the city to help Sewage and Water Board with filling 1,200 service cuts around the city. We're using bond funds for that. So just wanted you to know that's in the works, the contractor should be available on the street early
Okay.
next year.
Soon, okay, got it, yeah. So is that all, does that take care of all the surface cuts, or is there some combination between you and sewage and water?
That's just 1,200, that was just helping Sewage and Water Board address its backlog. Sewage and Water Board is not the only utility that's doing service cuts, there are plenty of others, so we need to take that into account. But I think this will help us just to have a general plan about how to manage it going forward, because we know that we're gonna have to continue to do that. We've got to manage the permanent pavement as they go.
Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going. I think this was recently discussed.
I'm going back up because I have a question. This says the infrastructure maintenance fund. The money to fund the infrastructure maintenance fund is coming from the fair share agreement. If that's the case, then 19.5 million of that 26 million should go to sewage and water board.
So I
If it's coming from the IMF and if the only source of funding is fair share.
So right now, the way the IMF works is each month, Sewage and Water Board gets its 75%. So whatever comes in at the end of the month, we send a accounting to Sewage and Water Board. They basically invoice us back and we send them a payment. This is what we're talking about here, I believe, is the money that was left over for the city's portion of the IMF. So this is their city, this is basically.
So this is the money that has flown, that has gone into the IMF
And is it
and hasn't been spent yet.
specific for the city's portion? Yes, that would be,
DPW.
yes.
Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Now to the drainage consolidation working group, I believe you wanted an update on this. As you know, the motion, Councilman Moreno to create the group to determine the various operational, financial, and legislative changes needed to consolidate said issue. Those are the memberships that were related to it. Go to the next slide. We've met 3 times as a group. We've had 1 or 2 one-off smaller group meetings to discuss strategy. This is something that continues to be ongoing. We've had our law department evaluate what it entails to move or address the consolidation piece. I think there is some significant benefits to this, but at the end of the day, what ultimately comes out is there has to be a decision on some financial feasibility to it. I think if I was to reflect some members of the board's concern was that before we look to address fees or the like, we have to show some sort of benefit to the public to be able to buy into a larger piece. I think we're continuing to have the ongoing discussion of the parcel fee. I know the business council, we had set up a meeting, but I know that had to be canceled for some particular reason. But that is ultimately where we're at. We have a draft due to the council on the status and the update by January 1st. We're prepared to provide that with a little bit more detail relative to at least the legal mechanisms we'd have to undertake if one was to live with one entity versus the other entity, and whatever kind of efficiencies either one of those would create. But ultimately, funding is the largest piece of any kind of successful partnership relative to this, and I think we're still having those conversations, to say the least.
Obviously, there's no question that if Sewage and Water Board takes on these additional responsibilities, there has to be a source of funding for that.
If that's the
If that's where we.
if that's the recommendation.
Yeah, if the recommendation is the other way, then you still have the issue of how you fund it. The question I would have, this organization, this committee is responsible for looking at how the fair share funds are being spent by Sewage and Water Board. Seems to me that an opportunity, and I'm sure you guys have probably considered this or at least had a discussion about it, but instead of this 75-25 split, maybe a different split where funds that currently now go from fair share funds to the city to DPW could in fact move with this responsibility to the sewage and water. At least it would be a mechanism for you to identify and specifically say, here's some money to take over this responsibility.
I mean, in advance of there being a parcel fee from stormwater.
I think those are all part of the conversations and comfort levels being trying to be addressed.
Good.
Maybe we were not clear about it, but something that's very important to us. I know you brought it up. $5 million from the merger of NOMTC and New Orleans and Company, and you mentioned that $15 million is going to the substation. But how is the city addressing it? Are you saying it's the 15 million?
I'm saying I think we're trying to look at least from my perspective, of some of the one-time infusions right now. Remember, we're still not reoccurring on our overall scheme of plans for financial solvency, but with the infusion of the one-time funds that we're utilizing, I can't think of a better or higher use for some of those funds that perfectly fits and aligns with some of the ARPA criteria than infrastructure projects, maintenance, kind of really important work, I think, for the public to have visual benefit over than those one-time funds. So I'll always be an advocate as much as possible to utilize our ARPA funds at some levels toward the initiatives relative to infrastructure maintenance.
Was realistically what the hospitality community felt when they took on basically the work of NOMTC was that the agreement we would have was that the savings would go into the infrastructure. So you're saying, well, we're going to use ARPA fund and one-time funds, but what we thought we had lined up was a continuing out into the future situation. And when the problem came up that the tax that was dedicated to NOMTC somehow needed to go just to cultural things, and therefore it couldn't go into the infrastructure. The city, our solution to the problem was go see Joe and we'll go get the tax rededicated, go back to the public and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. We're not taking anything away from culture, but we are now trying to put this much money into the infrastructure fund. And the city publicly said, no, we think there's a better way to do it. There's other culture funds within the budget that money's fungible, we just use that and we will fund it. So, but we really think we had a promise on that, and we don't think it's right for the city not to do that. I appreciate that you're using ARPA funds for infrastructure, which, by the way, you're right, it's a perfect thing to do, but that's a one-time thing. And so maybe the solution, because I don't see how the cultural part of what was NOMTC, which is now getting, I think, somewhere around 8 million a year rather than 3 million a year, how they're rationally spending it and where the other money was. We didn't ask the question at the time. So I don't know, Joe, is it possible that we could go and just get to put it up for election to have people rededicate that portion of the tax?
I think we could file an ordinance if we had to do it. I think we could to appropriate it, but I guess the thing we're all saying the same thing. We've all worked so well together. My preference would be to work something out with the administration where.
Well, Gilbert, isn't there something we can get in this? Is what we were told back then by the chief of staff and by Ramsey that there were other funds that are being used for culture, that we could use these funds for that and use these in the city. Is that not true? Why can't we get the money?
in all candor and transparency, I wasn't part of the negotiation, so I won't even try to speak intelligently about what was, even this information is not as, I'm not versed in it, to be honest with you. I don't know what the deal was or the deal wasn't. Fungible funds for, non-economic development, cultural benefits or whatnot. I guess what will be most helpful for me, and I think Joe teetered on it, give us the need we're trying to accomplish and let us figure out how to get there. Right, I mean, I think that would be more helpful than to kind of dig up history of what I wasn't part of, or even knowledgeable of, even today. Not saying that that's a problem moving forward, but at least I will have a better opportunity to address whatever this request or imminent need is. I heard 5 million plus that currently is going to, I guess, cultural economy, that should be going to the IMF fund, because of agreement that was made, I guess, on some sort of negotiation in the final days. I don't know the details of it, but is what everyone's looking for 5 million to go to?
If I can add some color to this.
Okay.
The New Orleans Tourism and Marketing Corporation received funding from the per night occupancy privilege tax. And in 2019, that was $5.5 million. Their budget for 2020 was for that number to be $5.6 million. Obviously, that was 2020. We know what happened with COVID. Those funds have obviously declined, but very clearly, we know exactly how much money was committed by the Fair Share Agreement to go to the IMF from that source. And I've asked that I be able to get the amount of money that has been paid from that tax to the New Orleans Tourism and Cultural Fund. So we know exactly how much money should have been flowing into the IMF from that source. The more important issue, thank you for the $15 million, and we can say, okay, that kind of gets us even. But this was a source of funding that was going to be ongoing and one that would grow as revenues to hotels grew. So it's an important component. It's 20% of the total recurring funds for the Fair Share Agreement. And again, we have our hospitality partners who did this deal based on that commitment. Now, obviously, you weren't part of this, but we did have the mayor's chief of staff and the mayor absolutely commit that they would find a recurring source of revenue for those funds to flow to the IMF for the purpose that it was intended. And, that was 2 years ago. A lot of things got put on the shelf because of COVID, but it's time to readdress it. It's time for us to get back to finding a way to make this IMF funding whole.
Look at it this way. New Orleans Tourism and Marketing consisted of occupancy taxes as funding source. It had two components. There was a cultural component where they used roughly 3 million a year to fund things like maybe they wanted to help with the Super Bowl or foreign cultural events or Essence Fest or something of that. About 5 million of it was used to pay for staff. Actually, it was Mark Roming's staff, which their role is to try and find a way to bring transient tourists to the industry. Mark's group moved in the merger, moved from New Orleans Tourism and Marketing over to New Orleans and Company. So about 5 million plus of expenses went over here. They were supposed to take the tax with that and put it in the infrastructure fund. That 5 million, those savings was supposed to go in the infrastructure fund. It was a way that hospitality said, we will take that expense on. It will save you money. That's a source of 5 million. It was 5 million of the projected 20%. When we asked why that hadn't happened, we were told that the tax is dedicated, has to be dedicated to culture. Cultural events, I'm not sure. why that, but there was some problem with moving the tax into the infrastructure fund. The promise was that they would find a way around that with the city budget. It's in meeting minutes, and we're happy to go over all that with you. And I know you weren't part of it. COVID hits, there's no money anywhere. We all said, well, nobody can do anything about that. 2 years down the road, this tax is starting to produce, and has for a while, produced income. That income is building up, as I understand it, in the cultural fund. And we think it needs to be addressed now. Now, I would love, and I think we're happy to get a group from this board to come sit down with you, go over all the facts and figures, but the way we're looking at it is effectively 20% of what we worked for back then and negotiated between the governor, the mayor, and the hospitality. 20% of that has not come to fruition.
So is the 5 million supposed to go into DPW? Is that what you're saying?
That 5 million is supposed to be in the infrastructure fund that's split 75-25. So of that $5 million, 25% of that would go into DPW.
25% of our 5 million would go to DPW.
Can I make a suggestion? So I just want to look at this really quickly. Remember, we also had villages that expired last year. And, Gilbert, we lost the street traffic controls at 1.77 mils, and we lost capital improvement and infrastructure of 0.56. So roughly $4 million, $5 million, just by loss of those villages. You're there, what I think IAB is saying is, we feel like we had a deal, we want the deal to be honored. What I feel like I hear you saying is, well, what do you want the money to go towards? And what I would say is, we know now that we're spending all of this money on maintenance and things that have had a backlog for forever. But maybe it's now time to look at this money that's been a fair share and use it as our millage replacement. So that way there's ongoing maintenance going forward. I feel like that feels like a really good way. So everybody's solved on this side, and then you have something tangible to have. And look, we've lost the money through millage. It's not going to be renewed anytime soon. So we can kill two birds with one stone.
That makes sense to me.
But in terms of where it would go, the way this thing's set up is that whatever infrastructure money goes into Sewerage and Water Board's account, Sewerage and Water Board comes to this board for approval to spend it. We will tell you that looking down 3 years and trying to make projections of what we've got a list of projects that this money would be used for. Not the least of which is the balance on the west side. What do you all call it? The West Power Plant, whatever it is. So to us, this is ongoing money that would be part of what this. I'm not quite sure how Ramsey negotiated the deal where DPW didn't have to come to us, but that's the way it's set up. So, but it's projects that the Sewerage and Water Board feels are critical, that this board approves or makes a recommendation that it's valuable, and it's gone to things like some of the money went into the substation, other portions of the substation, other than your 15 million, some of it is going to seal the projects to match federal funds. Some of it's going to master plan, with the creation of the master plan, the creation of a strategic plan for the Sewerage and Water Board. And we've got a list of projects, as you'll see, and maybe the best thing for us to do is to come down and sit down and show you the whole thing. But we do, what Joe's saying is right. We felt like we had a deal, and we worked hard. The hospitality industry worked very hard with the governor and the mayor to find this 25 million of recurring funds that the mayor wanted for infrastructure. And so we do feel like we had a deal, and the deal has not been facilitated. Not blaming you, Gilbert, or anybody for that matter, but the chief of staff, the deputy director of infrastructure, in public meetings said, we know we have a problem, but we have a way around it. And it will be funded. And so we rely on it.
My approach is always open, let's solve it.
Good, I appreciate that.
And,
And Joe, I didn't quite understand what you were saying about the millage, but maybe offline you can try to educate.
Well, I think all Gilbert is saying is, where do you want the money to go? And what I'm saying is, we had dedicated sources through millages for essentially maintenance, we've lost all of that. So to me, because we've lost the millages, we could replace that gap by using this fair share money.
Councilman, was that millage money going to certain one?
It would, no, it's a portion of it, you're right, but then if everything's
All money
consolidated.
is money, right?
Correct, exactly.
If and when.
I'm trying to solve both the problems of honoring the deal and having cities.
Well, and a lot of the money's gone into smart metering. Some of the money's projected to go into an asset management system, which is
Actually,
desperately needed.
Kassan's gonna show us in a minute.
And I think the most important thing, David, is thank you for being here. This is the first time we have actually communicated with the mayor's office. We've sent resolutions from this board saying this really needs to be addressed. We've talked to the city council members about this, and it's like everyone's ignored it. And so it's really important that you understand this is an issue that needs to be addressed and hopefully a solution found. We'd love to come and sit with you and spend more time talking about it. Thank you.
And thank you for coming. Greatly appreciate
Actually, if I can just address, one of the things from the resolution before, the idea about making some of this whole. So I know we also had a shortage in funding from 2020 and 2021 due to COVID. And that shortage for 2020 was about $20 million, for 2021 was about $10 million. We have $11 million that has been collected so far, local privilege going to the Tourism Cultural Fund.
Since the beginning.
Since the beginning, yeah.
Thank you.
So I think, and I'll send you the
Breakdown.
accounting breakdown.
Thank you.
I just received that. Apology for not being able to get that to y'all sooner. But I think that from our perspective, at least looking at making things whole to today, this additional $45 million above and beyond what otherwise we would have been budgeting towards infrastructure maintenance is part of that, making that piece whole. And I think from there, it's just a matter of figuring out.
And clearly, I can't speak for this board, but I think that is reasonable for this board to consider that, hey, we're whole from what we didn't get, but how do we deal with it going forward? That would be certainly something I think this board would consider.
Okay. Gilbert, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. I look forward to coming. Next on the presentations is the storage and water. Thank you, Hassan, I think.
Thank you, Paul. I think it's appropriate to say before I go into this slide that this IMF funding for water has been relevant and significant in more ways than you can think. At a time where we're incurring additional costs with really no ability to increase our revenue, this is really keeping us afloat, putting us in a place where we can support very key critical projects for the city. I mean, it has to be said. And you can, through my presentation, you can see how critical those projects are. So the first slide shows the to date, or as of October 31st, our revenue from the fair share deal, and as stated before, that includes about $650,000 per correction. So we're up to date with the revenue, including the correction. So far, we have about $7 million worth of expenditure. That number is going to change dramatically, and we have a funding pro forma slide showing projected expenditure for next year and that, which is obviously very good, but there's a discrepancy here with the balance and how much we spend, but it's because we've been holding to launch the two key projects, obviously, and then it's going to be a robust year next year. The next slide shows one of our priority projects that, again, this time been the key support of this project and plugging a hole, allowing us to move forward with the project. I know everybody's been anxious to when we would start the project, and we are very excited to tell you that as of on December 14th, we will be making an announcement. We're going to the board for the final approval of the contract, which enabled us to start actually working. We've been working for the last several months, negotiating and working through a lot of terms and specifications and a lot of details in order to, deliver the best product for our city. So very, very exciting time. And as early as January 1st, the contractor will start in earnest working on that project.
So if I'm looking at this slide correctly, you're saying that installation of meters is gonna begin mid-2023.
Right. So what will happen before that is a lot of the common components that would allow the project to be installed, meaning towers that allowing us to create coverage and touch every meter with 2 or 3 triple redundancy. So if one network fails, another one will step in. So we have about 96 or I want to say 98% coverage with redundancy. So that's huge in this business in terms of never lose signal or a meter. Obviously, we want it to be the most robust product. But you will see a lot of towers going up, a lot of work behind the scenes.
But those towers will happen in the first quarter and second quarter.
So when the first 4,000 meters are installed, they will be able to be utilized almost instantly because all the infrastructure that supports it would be in place. So that's the plan.
So you already have the right of way, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Working through, we don't anticipate any issues. We've been very thoughtful about what partners to work with,
Yeah.
Whether it's DOTD or the city or some of our properties. So we don't suspect any challenges with that. Yeah.
But if you don't have the right of ways yet, I mean, you anticipate, I think, what do you have, 5 of these towers you gotta put around the city?
I think approximately 7 now.
7, okay.
The talks have started, so nobody will be surprised. We've been doing a lot of legwork, but again, we can't sign anything until the board approves the contract itself. So,
And that's due to be approved on the 14th?
yes, next Wednesday. So,
Hassan, are you at liberty to say who the contractor is?
yeah, the vendor that we're signing the contract is Aquameters. And they have several vendors who would be helping with the installation of the software, other things. So,
Do you know if there's any local involvement, any local vendors?
significant local involvement, yes. And then that will all be shared at the board and we're happy to share that. I don't have all the information.
Sure.
But yes. So any other questions on that? It's a very exciting project. Obviously, we've all been waiting for it. Appreciate your patience. The next project that I've been on everybody's mind, they celebrated the groundbreaking a couple days ago, again, the milestone day for the city. And just if you look at the pie chart, it's just reflective of how much support we have gained or enjoyed for this project, from the highest level of government, from federal government, state government. The cities contributed significantly, system funding, and any way we look, we were able to find partners with support. So it's very exciting. And as you know,
Looks like to me in that slide that the guy second from the right is holding his shovel wall. What do you think?
It's not to dig in all the way.
Upside down.
he was the most efficient.
Well, the mayor's doing the same thing almost.
And I think I was the most excited. I picked the biggest shovel pull. I think, yeah. It was the first. So anyways, needless to say, that project is on track, it's moving forward with a lot of partners, obviously, but Entergy's equipment starting to move to the site that we had prepared for them. and, just moving forward.
So that the yellow pie piece to be determined funding is something that could be additional fresh.
It could be conceivably, yes, maybe leaning on you more, but I know last meeting, we've kind of committed as a body for the 20 million, which would be in addition to about 3+ million that went toward funding a gap for the 7, if you recall.
Right.
So we had money from the state for that, and with the higher bids, we plugged in that gap.
But to Gilbert's original question, where would that money go? That yellow wedge is one place where the money can go.
It's on the state capital outlay, 20%. Is that just current priority 1, or is that anticipated priority 5 moving up to priority 1?
To be honest with you, I don't think the SPY is up to date, so percentages may be off. Right?
But regardless of what the percent is the state portion of the pie
Reflecting,
cash in hand, which is priority 1, or is it also?
We use
include-
both, I mean, we have both. Because we have account for the funding source, the cash one, and the anticipated future one. So those two together.
How big is what's the difference? What's your priority 1 versus anticipated?
40 million priority 1, and 33, almost 34 million priority 1.
so we're counting on it, obviously, and it will be a huge hit if we don't.
That was all.
The next slide shows you in more details, the revenue on the left, minus the 31 million we showed before, and then the expenditures.
I'd like to point out, if I'm not mistaken, that you've got 31 million in revenue, you've only expended 7. There have been projects that are approved that you're still spending money.
Yes.
We've approved more than $7 million worth of projects.
Absolutely. So the next slide shows you all the projects that have been discussed and committed to funding. So that this on the left is all the projects that we are supporting. And the projected, obviously, we'll have a robust year, like I said, and you're gonna see significantly more spending from the remaining funding toward several projects. I'm happy to go through them all, but obviously
Where are we on the stormwater fee study?
so we have we've already given a go-ahead to refresh the 2016 plan that was created, which we thought was the most effective and efficient way to do it. So in 3 months from now, we will have an actual plan identifying what the cost, all projected, all theoretical, but based on calculations of what those methods and everything that you need to know about how to implement stormwater fee. That is, would be, it's a template from thousands of models throughout the city.
This is Ref Dallas.
The Raptors is doing that, they did that original one.
Yeah.
And at the same time, as you know, Water Collaborative and a few others, Business Council, are pushing the public and public information and involvement piece, and then those will be married at one point and make a case for it.
Also from the city, from the Advancing Cities Scholars, that the Water Collaborative is working also to help with the study.
Yeah.
And public participation.
Gilbert, this would be a good representation for you to look at of how we've used the IMF funding, the projects that have been approved by the Infrastructure Advisory Board, and how it's being employed by the Sewage and Water Board. It's a good list, and everything from the Turbine 7 to the filter gallery, Sycamore filter gallery. I mean, on and on. There's a lot of work that this isn't the real sexy stuff, that doesn't get reported in the newspaper, but this is the work that has to be done to be able to get that stuff done.
Right, right. I mean, an example would be when the Board of Engineers come to us, say, we have $25 million project coming your way, but you need to give us your portion. And if we hadn't come to you with an approval for $3 million to cement that deal, we wouldn't have been able to leverage that investment and do it well.
Right.
I mean, nobody wants to see that probably $2 billion investment in the city. And the only way we do it by us paying our share for it, so.
Let me get back to the stormwater issue for a minute. So there's, at least what the studies I've seen, there's maybe 7 ways you could go about it. Okay, some of them much fairer and more complicated to manage, some pretty simple, but not as fair. So in this study that we've approved 250,000 feet, is this gonna come up with, if you structure it this way, this is the expected revenue you might get out of it, or what is gonna come out of this study?
They may give us a couple of alternatives, but not several. I mean, they're going to use other countries, other cities that have been, utilizing the fee for years. What is complicated in this city is that there's a current funding mechanism that obviously not enough, that has to be discussed. And so is it how much or that support the drainage operations for us, right? So do we replace that? Abolish it completely, do we wait until it matures, has 3 different maturity dates? Do we have a side by side? I mean, there's a lot of questions that a lot of people in this room and the public have to weigh in on. What would be the best way to do it? But it's not.
If I can, because a lot of us have talked to a lot of people, so in theory, what you would hope is there's a millage that's not enough. That about half the tax, half the property in the city, might be a little bit off, but it's roughly that, half the property in the city is paying for it. And to simplify it, the other half of the property in the city is getting their water pumped away from that site for free.
Yeah.
And that includes federal property, state property, 2-lane, So obviously we haven't talked to the federal government, state, but we've talked to our idea of the thoughts of people I've talked to was, well, gee, if a stormwater management fee could bring in enough money to adequately handle what our cost is, then, and that's assessed across the board to all properties, and it's fair. So you're not killing the guy that owns a bunch of land out Marsh, out in New Orleans, East, okay? And it's fair, then you wouldn't use it, you wouldn't add on to what the taxpayers are paying if that's possible. I'm hoping that study says, okay, were you to do that and not give up the millage, if you will.
Right.
Can you fund it, and what would the cost be to people? Because people like Tulane or you and I, they all say, well, am I in favor of this, or would I consider paying this? Maybe. How much?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be difficult to move down the road unless we've got a study that shows us that. But I would think personally that we would have a hard time. Of course, Joe's district pay is much different. They don't mind how much they pay.
They can afford it, huh?
County Street in particular.
But I would think that people would be encouraged to paying the millage and then adding on.
Oh, I agree.
So it would be interesting for you all to structure what, let us know, what are the deliverables of this stuff, if you would.
Yeah, I would. This study would bring, or stormwater, if you really would bring fairness to everybody in the city. As you stated, half of people are getting the benefit for free, and the others are burned by the entire cost. And the other thing it would bring is increase in revenues that will allow us to do a better job with people when it comes to drainage, so.
So could we have that for the next meeting? What the
The deliverables for sure.
Or send them to us?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But like we said, within 3 months or so, we just need to share what that product will look like.
I just need to apologize, everybody, I've got to step out. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can't stay.
Thank you, Neil. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no problem. And then you still have one more detailed slide or last slide. Just showing the, I'm gonna start calling it the power complex. Just to, for simplicity, forget the West, so it's the power complex, just to show the funding sources. You know, we have 8 of them, and the 5th one in the middle of the sheet is the fair share, and the bottom line, what anticipated amount funded by this, by IMF is 24 million. So again, you've committed 20, or you had already committed the balance toward the D7, so it just shows you what we're projecting. So that's all I have for you.
Okay, thank you, and Gilbert took us through drainage consolidation.
You may want to add something, Hassan, he's been, I may have missed something on drainage consolidation that you may want to color in. Not putting you on the spot, but
No.
I was gonna open it up to you, but then I had a question.
Yeah, no, but I think you summed it up. From my perspective, it's going a little slower, but good things are coming out of it, you know, as recognizing the need in regards whether the city does it or the Solution Water Board does it. There seems to be an enhanced awareness and future, you know, immediate higher level of maintenance, you know, in terms of catch basin cleaning and lateral cleaning, what have you. So it's one good thing so far.
So if you had to set a timing on when you think this working group might reach some conclusions, do you have any idea?
It depends which way we go. So if, like, let me give you not to speak in the abstract, just purely hypothetical. If it goes consolidated to sewage and water board, there's probably less legal scrutiny and pass that we have to undertake, as opposed to if the city was to take it over, then we have some more hurdles. So I guess to your question, it just depends what the conclusion is, would detail kind of what the actual implementation period is, which is what's most important.
Gilbert, if the city took it over, would that mean it would take everything all the way to the pumps? Would you take over the pumps as well?
What, I do not believe so. That's not my understanding of it. I thought it would just be I don't want to get into I'm not capable of getting into the technical pieces, nor would I try, but not the pump piece. It would just be
All the pipes to
all the pipes from the 36-inch diameter and below would all just be one house.
Then you're gonna continue with the delineated system, you're just moving the line.
You know, if switching subjects just a little bit, if we're off of that subject, I don't want to. You know, if you look at my impression of I don't know how to put it, but the bad press, the Sewage and Water Board, of the problems that the public has with the Sewage and Water Board comes down into things like these cuts. So it'd be great to get those done as quickly as possible. And you all have a contract on board, you can start right away. I think that's great. It comes down to problems with meter reading, and we've gone through this. You know, given this the condition of our infrastructure, the condition of our meters, to try and read these meters and not have these problems, the only solution is going to be smart meter. So I think we're all frustrated by how long this is taking, but there are some good things that are happening here. And if we can get by the end of 23, half of the meters in and something of that nature, and operating at those, half of those meters are cover 80% of the bills, then the mistake in meter reading and the mistakes in bills ought to subside, and that should help the public's perception. The cuts should help the public's perception. You may do it, Gilbert, but sewage and water board probably get the credit because people think it's there. So I think, it's something we all ought to recognize that there is progress being made.
Gilbert, did you receive this board issued a progress report in July? August. That was, I think the best way to say it is it was a picture of at that time, how we thought the sewage and water board was performing. And we sent it to all of the council. I know we sent it to the mayor's
It was
office.
a progress report.
Yeah,
not a
that's-
quarterly report.
That's what I meant.
Did you
meant the
receive that?
progress report. We need to get you a copy of that. I think that would be very helpful, give you some perspective. Let's make sure we get a copy to Gilbert.
It kind of brings you up to date as of that point, and it's a fairly short read.
Yes, 2.5 pages.
And on the other issue, I'd like to solve whatever that delta is sooner than later so that we can be prepared probably for January kind of. We have some cleanup to do on budget stuff in January with OPCD and some other things, so.
Perhaps we can make an appointment with you next week or something.
Maybe
like that.
coordinate with you, Joe.
100%. Yeah, we can iron that out this year. That would be a good.
Great.
start.
Thanks.
I appreciate it. Well, we all appreciate it. And we appreciate you coming.
Hi.
I don't have to watch. I'm sorry, does anybody have anything? So I just want to let everybody know that anybody that would like to go to Herb Saint tonight for dinner, it's on Bill's.
I'll just come on down.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, we have one issue, that's the dates.
Oh, I am complex. Yes, these are the proposed dates for our 4 meetings next year. And I have a motion to approve.
No, we got one, we need to change one.
Yeah, March is supposed to be March 16th,
Okay, which one?
March 16th,
What does that need to change to next week?
Needs to become the 16th.
right?
I'm sorry?
It should be March 16th.
It's showing March 9th right now, but it will be changed to March 16th.
Okay, the dates,
Just don't forget to-
if I can have a motion that the dates of the meetings would be March 6th, and for 2023, March 16th, June 8th, September 14th, and December 14th.
So
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, all in favor,
Do we have?
been approved.
Was there public comment?
Was there any public comment?
We don't do virtual meetings, so they have to come here.
Okay, there is no public comment. Any other business or questions or comments? Again, thanks to each one of you. I appreciate it.